The needle slipped through Florence Sullivan's calloused finger for the third time that morning, and she knew her mind was anywhere but on the ivory wedding dress spread across her work table in the cramped back room of her seamstress shop in Colfax, California. It was late spring in 1882, and the golden afternoon light filtered through the dusty window, catching on the threads and pins scattered across every available surface. Florence pressed her bleeding finger to her mouth and stared at the crimson spot now marring the pristine white fabric. Just another thing ruined by her carelessness, she thought bitterly. Another beautiful thing destroyed because she could not keep her hands steady or her thoughts from wandering to places they had no business going. The bell above her shop door chimed, pulling her from her dark reverie. Florence quickly wrapped her finger in a scrap of cloth and hurried to the front room, smoothing down her simple brown work dress and tucking a strand of auburn hair back into the bun at the nape of her neck. She was 23 years old and had been running this shop alone for nearly 2 years now, ever since her aunt had passed and left her both the business and the crushing weight of solitude that came with it. "I will be with you in just one moment," Florence called out, forcing brightness into her voice that she did not feel. But when she pushed through the curtain separating her workroom from the shop floor, the words died in her throat. Standing in the doorway, hat in hand, was a man who looked like he had ridden straight out of one of those dime novels her aunt used to hide beneath the counter. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Dust covered his worn leather vest and faded denim trousers, and his boots were scuffed from hard use. But it was his eyes that struck her most, a startling shade of blue-green that reminded her of the ocean she had seen once as a child, before her parents died, and she came to live with her aunt in this dusty California town. "Afternoon, miss," the man said, his voice low and rough like gravel being dragged across wood. "I am hoping you might be able to help me with something. I know it is not exactly proper for a man to come into a dress shop unaccompanied, but I am in a bit of a situation." Florence found her voice, though it came out quieter than she intended. What kind of situation would that be? He held up a shirt, or what remained of one. The fabric was torn in several places, and one entire sleeve hung by mere threads. "Got caught in some barbed wire while driving cattle through the pass yesterday. This is the only decent shirt I have left, and I have got a meeting with a land agent tomorrow morning. I would not normally care, but this man is particular about appearances, and I cannot afford to lose this deal." "I see." Florence stepped closer, taking the ruined garment from his hands. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a shock run through her at the contact, as unexpected as lightning from a clear sky. She pulled back quickly, clutching the shirt to her chest. "I can mend this for you." "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow morning, first light." He grimaced slightly. "I know that is not much time. I will pay double your usual rate." Florence should have said no. She had the wedding dress to finish, and Mrs. Patterson was already breathing down her neck about the delivery date. But something in this stranger's eyes, a kind of quiet desperation mixed with stubborn pride, made her nod before she could think better of it. "I can have it ready by dawn," she heard herself say. "But I will need your name for the order." "August Keller," he said, and when he smiled, Florence felt something shift in her chest, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for far too long. "And yours, Florence Sullivan. Miss Sullivan." He said her name carefully, as if testing the weight of it. "I am grateful for your help. I will be back at sunrise." After he left, Florence stood holding his shirt for a long moment, breathing in the scent of leather and horses and open sky that clung to the fabric. Then she shook herself, annoyed at her own foolishness. He was just another customer, another man passing through town like so many others. She had learned long ago not to let herself hope for more than that. But as she sat down at her work table that evening, carefully threading her needle by lamplight, Florence found her thoughts drifting back to August Keller again and again. She worked through the night, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she repaired each tier, reinforced each seam. The wedding dress sat forgotten in the corner, covered with a sheet. When the first pale light of dawn crept through her window, Florence held up the finished shirt and examined it critically. The repairs were nearly invisible, the fabric as strong as it had been before the damage. She folded it carefully and wrapped it in brown paper, then sat behind her counter to wait. August arrived just as the sun broke over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. He looked freshly shaved and his hair was still damp, as if he had dunked his head in a water trough. When Florence handed him the package, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "That was fast work," he said, unwrapping the paper. His hand stilled when he saw the shirt, and he looked up at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "Miss Sullivan, this is remarkable. I cannot even see where the tears were." "That is the point," Florence said, but she felt warmth spread through her chest at his praise. A good repair should be invisible. August ran his fingers over the mended seams, and Florence noticed his hands were scarred and calloused from years of hard work. "How much do I owe you?" She named a price that was fair but not doubled as he had offered. He tried to argue, but Florence was firm. "I gave you a quote, Mr. Keller. I expect you to honor it, just as I honored my promise to have your shirt ready on time." Something flickered across his face, an emotion Florence could not quite read. Then he nodded slowly and counted out the coins, placing them on the counter between them. "You are an honest woman, Miss Sullivan. That is rare in my experience. Perhaps you have been keeping company with the wrong sort of people," Florence said, surprising herself with her boldness. August laughed, a warm sound that filled the small shop and seemed to chase away some of the loneliness that had settled into its corners over the past 2 years. "Perhaps I have," he agreed. "Thank you again for your help. I hope we meet again." He left before Florence could respond, and she stood at her window watching him stride down the dusty street toward the land office. Only when he disappeared from view did she allow herself to sink into her chair, her heart racing in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Florence forced herself to focus on the wedding dress, working with single-minded determination to make up for lost time. But her mind kept returning to August Keller, to the way he had looked at her shirt with such appreciation, as if it were a work of art rather than a simple repair. No one had looked at her work that way in a long time. No one had looked at her that way in even longer. 3 days passed with no sign of August, and Florence told herself she was relieved. She finished the wedding dress and delivered it to a grateful Mrs. Patterson, who invited her to the ceremony but seemed surprised when Florence declined. The truth was that Florence could not bear to watch another couple exchange vows and promises of forever when her own future stretched before her, empty and unchanging as the dusty California road outside her shop. On the 4th day, as Florence was closing up for the evening, the bell above her door chimed again. She looked up from the ledger she had been studying and felt her breath catch. August Keller stood in the doorway once more, hat in hand, but this time he looked uncertain in a way that made him seem younger, more vulnerable. "Mr. Keller," Florence said, rising from her stool behind the counter. "Did something happen to your shirt?" "No, the shirt is fine." "Better than fine, actually." He twisted his hat in his hands. "The meeting went well. I secured the lease on a parcel of land north of town, good grazing for cattle. I will be staying in the area for a while, at least through the end of the season." "That is wonderful news," Florence said carefully. Congratulations. Thank you. August took a step closer, and Florence noticed he had shaved again and was wearing a clean shirt, a different one this time. Miss Sullivan, I know this is forward of me and you have every right to refuse, but I was hoping you might consider having dinner with me. There is a respectable restaurant on Main Street, the one with the blue shutters. They serve a decent roast on Fridays, or so I have been told. Florence's first instinct was to say no. She had been asked to dinner before by other men in town, usually older widowers or awkward young ranch hands who stumbled over their words and looked at her with a mixture of pity and hope that made her skin crawl. She had refused them all, preferring her solitude to the complications that came with allowing someone close. But August Keller was different. There was no pity in his eyes when he looked at her, only genuine interest and something else, something that made her think of spring mornings and new beginnings. I would like that, Florence heard herself say, and the smile that spread across August's face was worth the risk of whatever pain might come later. They agreed to meet at the restaurant the following evening. After August left, Florence closed up the shop in a daze and climbed the narrow stairs to her living quarters above. The rooms were small but tidy, furnished with pieces her aunt had collected over the years. Florence stood at the window overlooking the street and pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. What was she doing? She knew better than to let herself hope, to dream of things that always seemed to slip through her fingers like water. Her parents had died when she was young, victims of a cholera outbreak that swept through Sacramento. Her aunt had been kind but distant, more interested in her needlework than in raising a child. And then there had been Thomas, the young banker who had courted her 3 years ago, who had promised her a future filled with comfort and children and love. But that had all been lies. Thomas had been engaged to someone else the entire time, a wealthy merchant's daughter from San Francisco. Florence had been nothing more than a distraction, a pretty face to amuse him during his business trips to Colfax. After Thomas, Florence had sworn she would never let anyone hurt her that way again. She had thrown herself into her work, building her reputation as the finest seamstress in the county. She created beautiful things for other people while her own life remained plain and colorless as an unfinished garment. But August Keller made her want to believe again, and that terrified her more than anything. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Florence had several customers, mostly women ordering simple repairs or asking about fabric for new dresses. She smiled and nodded and took their measurements, all while her mind raced ahead to the evening. She changed her dress 3 times before finally settling on a simple blue cotton with pearl buttons that her aunt had made years ago. It was outdated but well made, and the color brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Florence arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes late, having spent far too long fussing with her hair. August was already there, standing outside the blue-shuttered building, and his face lit up when he saw her approaching. "Miss Sullivan," he said, offering his arm, "you look beautiful." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Inside, the restaurant was warm and welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting a golden glow over everything. August had reserved a table near the window, and he pulled out Florence's chair for her before taking his own seat. They ordered the roast, and as they waited for their food, August began to talk. He told her about his life as a cattle driver, about the long months on the trail pushing herds north to market. He spoke of sleeping under the stars and crossing rivers swollen with spring runoff, of dust storms that turned day into night, and the bone-deep satisfaction of delivering a herd safely to its destination. His voice took on a different quality when he talked about the work. rich with passion and purpose that Florence understood in her bones. It was how she felt when she created something beautiful from mere fabric and thread, that sense of bringing order and meaning to raw materials. "What made you decide to lease land here?" Florence asked, cutting into her roast. The meat was tender and seasoned with herbs, and she realized she had been so nervous all day that she had forgotten to eat lunch. August's expression grew serious. "I am getting too old to spend my life on the trail. I turned 27 last month, and I have been driving cattle since I was 15. It is hard work, and it only gets harder as the years pass. I have saved enough money to lease a good piece of land and start building my own herd. In a few years, if all goes well, I will be able to buy the property outright." "That sounds like a solid plan," Florence said, "but you will miss the trail, I think. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it." August looked at her with surprise, as if no one had ever listened to him closely enough to understand that before. "You are right. Part of me will always miss it. But a man cannot build a future on the open range. He needs roots, a place to call home." He paused, then added quietly, "A family, eventually, if he is lucky enough to find someone willing to share that life with him." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. Florence looked down at her plate, her pulse racing. "Tell me more about the land you leased," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. August accepted the redirection gracefully, and they spent the rest of dinner talking about his plans for the property. He wanted to focus on breeding quality cattle rather than quantity. He explained, building a reputation for well-bred stock that would command premium prices. It was an ambitious goal, but August spoke with such confidence and enthusiasm that Florence found herself believing he could achieve anything he set his mind to. After dinner, August walked Florence back to her shop. The evening was cool and clear, with a vast sweep of stars overhead that seemed to go on forever. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "Thank you for having dinner with me," August said when they reached her door. "I enjoyed your company very much." "I enjoyed yours as well," Florence admitted. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly nervous. "Perhaps we could do this again sometime. I would like that very much." August smiled, and in the lamplight spilling from nearby windows, his eyes seemed to glow. "May I call on you again? Properly, I mean. I know I should have asked your permission first before inviting you to dinner." Florence felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Yes, you may call on me. I would like that." August reached out and took her hand, raising it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was light as a butterfly's wing, but Florence felt it all the way to her toes. Then he released her hand, tipped his hat, and walked away into the night. Florence stood at her door for a long moment, watching his retreating figure until the darkness swallowed him whole. Then she went inside and climbed the stairs to her rooms, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched her skin. Over the next few weeks, August became a regular presence in Florence's life. He called on her 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes taking her to dinner, other times simply walking with her through town or sitting in her shop while she worked. He was easy to talk to, with a quick wit and a deep well of stories from his years on the trail. But he was also a good listener, and Florence found herself opening up to him in ways she had not expected. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about losing her parents and coming to live with her aunt. She spoke of learning the seamstress trade, of the satisfaction she found in creating beautiful things with her hands. And one evening, as they sat together on the bench outside her shop watching the sun set over the western hills, she even told him about Thomas. "He made me feel foolish," Florence said quietly, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I should have known better." All the signs were there, the way he only visited on certain days, how he never introduced me to his family. But I wanted to believe his lies because the alternative was being alone. August was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The only fool in that situation was him. Any man who would treat you that way, who would not see your worth, is not worth your tears or your regret." Florence looked up at him, surprised by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "You barely know me, August. How can you be so certain I know enough?" He turned to face her, his blue-green eyes intense in the fading light. "I know you are talented and kind and honest. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met, that you take pride in your craft even when no one else sees or appreciates it. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a week of rain." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And I know that I have never met anyone quite like you, Florence Sullivan." Florence's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to kiss him so badly it physically hurt, but fear held her back. Fear that this was all too good to be true, that August would turn out to be just another Thomas, that she would end up broken and alone again. As if reading her thoughts, August said softly, "I am not going anywhere, Florence. I am not just passing through. I am building a life here, and I would very much like for you to be part of it. But I understand if you need time. I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust me." And he did wait. Through the long golden days of summer, August courted Florence with a patience and gentleness that slowly began to heal the wounds Thomas had left behind. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows near his land. He fixed the loose board on her shop steps that she had been meaning to repair for months. He introduced her to his horse, a gentle mare named Sage, and taught Florence to ride on Sunday afternoons when the shop was closed. But more than anything, August simply showed up. Day after day, week after week, he proved through his steady presence that he meant what he said. He was not going anywhere. It was in late August, during a rare thunderstorm that sent rain drumming against the shop windows, that Florence finally let down the last of her walls. August had stopped by to return a vest she had mended for him, and they ended up sitting together in her workroom, drinking tea and listening to the storm rage outside. "I have been thinking," Florence said, setting down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly, "about what you said. About building a life here." August went very still, his eyes fixed on her face. And I think I would like to be part of that life, if the offer still stands." The smile that spread across August's face was brighter than the lightning flashing outside. He set down his own cup and moved closer to her, taking both her hands in his. "Florence, the offer will stand until the day I die, and maybe even after that." This time, when August leaned in to kiss her, Florence did not pull away. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Florence felt something inside her finally break free. All the fear and pain and loneliness she had been carrying for so long seemed to melt away, replaced by a warmth that filled every empty corner of her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, August rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I have loved you since the moment you handed me that mended shirt and refused to overcharge me for it." Florence laughed, a bright sound full of joy she had not felt in years. "I love you too, even though you are stubborn and terrible at bartering and apparently fall in love with women over laundry repairs." "Only this one woman," August corrected, pulling her close. "Only you." They sat together as the storm passed, talking about the future they would build together. August wanted to marry her as soon as possible, but Florence insisted on waiting at least until the fall. She wanted time to finish all her outstanding orders, to properly close down her shop or arrange for someone else to take it over. August agreed, though his impatience was evident in every look and touch. The next few months were some of the happiest of Florence's life. She spent her days working in the shop and her evenings with August, planning their future together. They decided to marry in October, a small ceremony with just a few close friends as witnesses. August had no family left, his parents having died years ago, and Florence's only living relatives were distant cousins back east, who she had not spoken to in years. But the lack of family did not diminish their joy. If anything, it made their bond feel even more precious, as if they were creating a new family out of nothing but love and determination. As the wedding approached, Florence found herself working on her own dress in the quiet hours of the night. It was nothing like the elaborate confections she created for her wealthy clients. Instead, she chose a simple design in cream-colored silk, with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar that she worked on by candlelight. Each stitch was placed with care, each tiny flower and vine a prayer for the future she and August would share. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, August arrived at the shop looking troubled. Florence immediately set aside the handkerchief she had been hemming and went to him. "What is wrong?" she asked, taking his hands. They were cold despite the mild evening, and she could feel tension thrumming through him. August pulled her to sit beside him on the settee she kept in the front room for clients. "There is something I need to tell you. I should have told you before, but I was afraid of how you would react." Florence felt ice settle in her stomach. "What is it?" "The land I leased. The deal I made with the land agent, it is not as secure as I led you to believe." August ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Florence had come to recognize as a sign of deep agitation. "The owner of the property wants to sell it outright by the end of the year. If I cannot come up with the purchase price by then, I will lose the lease and everything I have invested in it." "How much do you need?" Florence asked, her mind already racing through calculations. August named a sum that made her wince. It was a substantial amount, far more than she had in her modest savings. "I have been saving every penny I can," he continued. "Working extra jobs, taking on any cattle-driving work that comes my way. But it is not enough. Even if I work myself to death between now and December, I will still fall short by almost a third." Florence was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "What if we combined our resources? I have some money saved, not much, but enough to make a difference. And if I sell the shop and the living quarters above it, that would bring in even more." August shook his head immediately. "No, I will not ask you to give up your business, Florence. That shop is your livelihood, your independence. I will find another way. There is no other way, and you know it." Florence cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, August Keller. That shop has been my whole world for 2 years, but it was never truly mine. It was my aunt's dream, not mine. You asked me once if I would miss the trail if I gave it up. Well, I will not miss that shop. What I would miss, what I could not bear to lose, is you. We are building a life together, and that means making sacrifices for each other. But what will you do if you sell the shop?" August asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Seamstresses need a place to work." Florence smiled. "I will work from home, our home on the land you leased. I will take on clients who are willing to travel out to the property, and I will create a space for myself in whatever house we build. It will be different, but it will be ours, together." August pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I do not deserve you," he murmured against her hair. "Probably not," Florence agreed, her voice muffled against his chest. "But you are stuck with me anyway." The next morning, Florence put her shop up for sale. It sold within a week to a young couple from Sacramento who were looking to start fresh in a smaller town. The price was fair, and when combined with August's savings and Florence's own modest nest egg, They would have enough to purchase the land with a small amount left over to start building a proper house. On a crisp October morning, with golden leaves swirling in the breeze and the sun shining bright overhead, Florence Sullivan married August Keller in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Florence wore her cream silk dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that August had picked that morning. August wore his mended shirt, the one Florence had repaired the day they met, because he said it was lucky. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister asked if August would take Florence to be his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong, full of conviction. And when Florence spoke her own vows, her voice never wavered, even as tears of joy streamed down her face. They sealed their union with a kiss that made the handful of witnesses clap and cheer. And then they walked out of the church together as husband and wife, ready to face whatever the future held. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Florence and August moved into a small cabin on their new property while they saved money to build a larger house. The cabin had only 2 rooms and a tendency to let in drafts, but they made it cozy with rugs and curtains Florence stitched from fabric remnants. She set up a corner of the main room as her workspace, and to her surprise, found that she enjoyed working from home even more than she had enjoyed having her own shop. Clients still came to her, willing to make the ride out to the property for her skill with a needle. And without the overhead costs of maintaining a shop in town, Florence found she could charge slightly less and still turn a good profit. August worked from dawn to dusk building up his herd, buying and selling cattle, establishing relationships with other ranchers in the area. It was hard work for both of them, but they went to bed each night exhausted and happy, wrapped in each other's arms. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows that lasted well into February. Florence and August were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks, unable to travel to town or receive visitors. But instead of going stir-crazy as Florence had feared, they used the time to simply be together. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. August taught Florence to play poker using dried beans as betting chips. Florence taught August to mend his own clothes, though he never quite got the hang of it. And in the evenings, they sat together by the fire, Florence working on her sewing while August read aloud from books borrowed from the small lending library in town. It was during one of those quiet evenings that Florence realized she had been wrong about what made a home. It was not 4 walls and a roof, not a business or a sense of independence. Home was this, was August's voice reading poetry in the firelight, was the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other so well that words were no longer always necessary. "What are you thinking about?" August asked, looking up from his book to find her watching him with a soft smile. "I am thinking that I am happy," Florence said simply. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again after Thomas. I thought that part of me was broken beyond repair." August set down his book and moved to sit beside her on the floor, taking her hand. "You were never broken, Florence. A little cracked maybe, a little worn, but not broken. Like a favorite piece of clothing that just needs the right person to mend it." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. She set aside her sewing and turned to face him fully. "You stitched my broken heart together," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know that sounds foolish, comparing myself to one of my repair jobs, but it is true. You took something damaged and made it whole again. You made me whole again." August pulled her into his lap, cradling her against his chest. "Then we did that for each other," he said softly. "Because you did the same for me. I spent so many years moving from place to place, never putting down roots, afraid to want more than the next drive, the next paycheck. I thought I was content with that life. But then I walked into your shop with a torn shirt and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, Something in my life could be fixed. And you showed me that broken things can be mended, that it is possible to start over and build something beautiful from the pieces." They held each other as the fire burned low, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Florence discovered she was pregnant in March, and the news sent August into such a frenzy of excitement and worry that she had to sit him down and tell him firmly that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she had every intention of doing so successfully. But despite her practical words, Florence was nervous too. The nearest doctor was in town, a good hour's ride away on horseback, and winter snows could make that journey impossible. August immediately began making plans to stay in town for the last few weeks before the baby was due, but Florence refused. This was their home, and this was where their child would be born. In the end, they compromised. August arranged for Mrs. Chen, an experienced midwife who lived about halfway between their property and town, to come stay with them for the final month of Florence's pregnancy. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had delivered half the babies in the county and had strong opinions about everything from diet to exercise to the proper way to swaddle an infant. Florence liked her immediately. Mrs. Chen moved into the cabin in early October, taking over the small bedroom and turning the rest of the cabin into what August jokingly called a baby fortress. She filled the shelves with herbs and tinctures, stacked clean linens in every corner, and drilled August relentlessly on what to do in case of various emergencies. August bore it all with good-natured patience, though Florence could see the fear lurking in his eyes every time Mrs. Chen mentioned something that could go wrong. The baby came on a cool October evening, exactly 1 year and 1 week after Florence and August's wedding. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the next morning, but Mrs. Chen guided Florence through it with firm hands and soothing words. And when August was finally allowed back into the room, he found his wife exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a quilt Florence had stitched during the long summer months. "It is a boy," Florence said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "We have a son, August." August knelt beside the bed, staring down at the tiny red face of his child with an expression of such pure wonder that it made Florence's heart ache. "He is perfect," August whispered, reaching out with one calloused finger to stroke the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Aaron, after August's father, and as Mrs. Chen had predicted, the baby was healthy and strong. He had his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's auburn hair, and from the moment he was born, he ruled the household with tiny fists and lusty cries. Mrs. Chen stayed for another week, teaching Florence how to nurse and change and soothe the baby. Then she packed up her things, accepted payment that August practically had to force on her, and headed back to her own home with strict instructions to send for her immediately if anything seemed wrong. Life with a newborn was chaotic and exhausting in ways Florence had not anticipated. Aaron seemed to have his days and nights confused, sleeping peacefully all afternoon only to wake screaming the moment darkness fell. Florence spent her nights pacing the floor with the baby while August hovered anxiously, trying to help but mostly just getting in the way. Her sewing business ground to a halt as Florence struggled to find even a few minutes to work between feedings and diaper changes. But despite the exhaustion, despite the moments when Florence was so tired she could barely remember her own name, she had never been happier. Watching August with their son filled her with a joy so profound, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. He was such a gentle father, patient and attentive in ways that surprised both of them. He sang to Aaron in the evenings, old trail songs with silly lyrics that made Florence laugh. He walked the floor for hours when the baby was fussy, never once complaining about his own lack of sleep. "You are good at this," Florence told him one night as she watched August settle Aaron back into his cradle after a particularly difficult bout of crying. August looked up in surprise. "At what? Half the time I have no idea what I am doing. At being a father, at being a husband, at being exactly what we need you to be." Florence moved to stand beside him, and together they looked down at their sleeping son. "I meant what I said before, August. You stitched my broken heart together, but it is more than that. You gave me a family, a real family, something I never thought I would have again." August wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We gave each other a family," he corrected gently. "That is what makes it work, Florence. We chose each other, and we keep choosing each other every single day. That is what love is." As the months passed and Aaron grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, Florence and August settled into their new life as parents. August continued to build his cattle business, slowly but steadily establishing himself as a man of his word who delivered quality stock on time. His reputation grew, and with it came more opportunities, better deals, a steady income that allowed them to start building the house they had been dreaming of. Construction began in the spring when Aaron was 6 months old. They hired a crew of builders from town, and over the course of several months, a beautiful 2-story house took shape on a gentle rise overlooking the pastures. It was built of sturdy timber with a wide front porch and large windows that let in plenty of light. The downstairs had a spacious kitchen, a formal dining room, a parlor, and a small room off the parlor that would serve as Florence's sewing studio. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a small sitting area. Florence spent hours planning the interior, choosing fabrics for curtains and cushions, stitching quilts and linens for each room. It was the first time in her life she had been able to create a space that was truly hers, and she poured her heart into making it beautiful. They moved into the new house in August, on a sweltering afternoon when the temperature seemed determined to melt everything in sight. But despite the heat, Florence felt nothing but joy as she carried Aaron over the threshold of their new home. August followed with an armload of boxes, grinning like a fool. "Welcome home," he said, setting down his burden and pulling Florence into a kiss that made her blush even after nearly 2 years of marriage. That night, after Aaron was asleep in his new bedroom and the last of the boxes had been unpacked, Florence and August stood together on their front porch, looking out over the land they now owned outright. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and pink. From the pastures came the low calls of cattle settling down for the night. "You ever regret it?" August asked quietly. "Giving up your shop, moving out here, tying yourself to a stubborn cowboy and his impossible dreams?" Florence turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek. "Not for a single moment. You want to know why? Why? Because my shop was just a building, 4 walls and a roof. But this," she gestured to the land around them, to the house behind them, to everything they had built together, "this is so much more than that. This is a home. This is a family. This is a life I never dared to hope for." She paused, then added softly, "You gave me that, August. You and Aaron. You are my whole world now. Everything else is just details." August kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that held 2 years of love and trust and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and said, "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I know," Florence said, smiling. "That is why I chose you." The The years that followed were full and rich in ways Florence had never imagined possible. The cattle business continued to thrive, allowing August to expand his herd and hire a few ranch hands to help with the work. Florence's sewing business flourished as well, with clients coming from as far as Sacramento to commission her work. She specialized in wedding dresses and fine embroidery, creating pieces that became treasured heirlooms. Aaron grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father around the ranch like a tiny shadow. By the time he was 3, he was already learning to ride on a gentle pony August bought just for him. Florence would watch from the kitchen window as father and son rode around the paddock, Aaron's delighted laughter carrying on the breeze, and feel her heart swell with contentment. When Aaron was 4, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect this time, or perhaps because she was simply too busy chasing after a rambunctious little boy to worry over much about what might go wrong. Their second child, a daughter they named Alice, was born in the spring of 1888. She had August's dark hair and Florence's brown eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. August, who had been such a patient, steady presence with Aaron, turned into absolute mush around his daughter. He carried her everywhere, talked to her in ridiculous baby voices, and flatly refused to put her down even when Florence insisted he would spoil her rotten. "Let him spoil her, Mrs. Chen, who had come to help with the birth again, advised Florence with a knowing smile. Daughters need their fathers to show them how a man should treat them. This little one will never settle for less than she deserves, because her papa is teaching her what real love looks like." Florence took the advice to heart, and she had to admit there was something beautiful about watching August with Alice. He was gentle and protective without being overbearing, teaching their daughter from her earliest days that she was valued and cherished. As the children grew, the house filled with noise and laughter, and the chaos that came with raising a family. Florence's sewing studio became a place where Aaron and Alice liked to play, building forts out of bolts of fabric and pretending the dress forms were knights or princesses depending on their mood. Florence pretended to be annoyed when they disrupted her work, but secretly she loved having them nearby, loved the sound of their voices and the constant interruptions that reminded her she was not alone. The ranch prospered beyond August's wildest dreams. By the time Aaron was 10 and Alice was 6, August employed 5 full-time ranch hands and owned one of the largest herds in the county. He had earned a reputation as a fair employer and an honest dealer, and people sought him out for advice and partnerships. But success never went to August's head. He remained the same steady, hard-working man Florence had fallen in love with, though he laughed more now, and the lines of worry that had creased his forehead in those early years had been replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. One evening in early fall, after the children had been put to bed, and the house was finally quiet, August found Florence in her studio working on a particularly intricate piece of embroidery. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, admiring the way lamplight caught in her auburn hair, which now had a few strands of silver threaded through it. "What are you working on?" he asked, moving to stand behind her chair. "A christening gown," Florence said, holding up the delicate white garment. "Mrs. Patterson's daughter is having a baby, and she asked me to create something special. It is beautiful." August rested his hands on her shoulders, gently massaging the tense muscles there. "You have been working too hard lately. When was the last time you took a day off?" Florence laughed. "I could ask you the same question. We are both terrible at resting." "True enough." August turned her chair so she faced him, then knelt down so they were at eye level. But I have been thinking. The ranch is in good shape. The children are old enough now that they do not need us every single moment. What do you say to taking a trip, just the two of us? We could go to San Francisco for a week, see the ocean, stay in a fancy hotel, eat in restaurants, and sleep as late as we want. Florence stared at him in surprise. In the 11 years since they had married, they had never been away from the ranch for more than a day at a time. The idea of a whole week, just the two of them, was both thrilling and terrifying. "What about the children?" she asked. "Mrs. Chen has already agreed to come stay with them, and the ranch hands can keep things running. I trust them, Florence. It is time we trusted ourselves to take a break." Florence searched his face, seeing the hope and excitement there, and found herself nodding. "All right, let's do it. Let's go to San Francisco." The trip happened 3 weeks later, in October, when the weather was mild and the ranch work had slowed down for the season. Aaron and Alice were initially upset about their parents leaving, but Mrs. Chen won them over with promises of special treats and staying up late. Florence hugged her children tightly before climbing into the wagon that would take them to the train station, fighting back tears at the thought of being separated from them for a whole week. But as the train carried them west toward the coast, Florence felt a sense of freedom she had not experienced in years. She and August had a private compartment, a luxury they could now afford, but still felt deliciously indulgent. They talked and laughed and watched the landscape roll by outside their window. August held her hand the entire journey, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. San Francisco was overwhelming and wonderful in equal measure. The city was so much larger and louder than Colfax, full of people and noise and endless things to see and do. They stayed in a beautiful hotel overlooking the bay, with a room that had a real bathtub and hot running water. Florence spent an absurdly long time in that bathtub the first evening, luxuriating in the heat and the privacy. They spent their days exploring the city. They visited the Cliff House and watched sea lions basking on the rocks below. They rode the new cable cars up and down the steep hills, laughing like children. They ate in restaurants that served food from all over the world, flavors and dishes Florence had never even imagined. And they walked along the beach, hand in hand, watching the waves roll in from the vast Pacific Ocean. On their last evening in the city, August took Florence to a fancy restaurant for dinner. They dressed in their finest clothes, August in a suit he had bought specifically for the trip and Florence in a blue silk dress she had made herself. The restaurant was elegant and expensive, with crystal chandeliers and waiters in white gloves who served course after course of exquisite food. After dessert, August reached across the table and took Florence's hand. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Florence's eyes widened. "August, you already gave me this trip. You do not need to give me anything else. I want to." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant. The pendant was shaped like a heart, and when Florence looked closer, she could see tiny stitches etched into the metal, as if the heart had been sewn together. "August," Florence breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "You told me once that I stitched your broken heart together," August said softly. "I wanted you to have something to remember that, to remember what we have built together. We have been through so much, Florence. We have worked so hard and sacrificed so much to get here. But it has all been worth it because we did it together." Florence was crying in earnest now, not caring that other diners were starting to stare. August came around the table and fastened the necklace around her throat, then kissed her temple. "I love you," he whispered. "Today, tomorrow, forever. You are my whole heart, Florence Keller." "And you are mine," Florence managed to say through her tears. She touched the pendant, feeling the tiny etched stitches beneath her fingertips. Always, August, always. They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly, and the children happy but very ready to have their parents back. Aaron and Alice launched themselves at Florence the moment she stepped through the door, talking over each other in their eagerness to tell her everything that had happened while she was gone. August caught her eye over their heads and grinned, and Florence grinned back, feeling more complete than she had all week. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms, but something had shifted for Florence. The trip to San Francisco had reminded her that she and August were more than just parents and business owners. They were still the same two people who had fallen in love over a mended shirt, who had chosen each other despite their fears and uncertainties. The trip had given them space to reconnect with that, to remember why they had fought so hard to build this life together. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Aaron grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved working with the cattle as much as his father did. Alice was more artistic, showing a talent for drawing and painting that August encouraged by buying her supplies and setting up a small studio space next to Florence's sewing room. Both children were bright and kind and confident in ways that made Florence's heart ache with pride. When Aaron turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go to agricultural college in Sacramento to learn modern ranching techniques. August was initially hesitant about the idea, worried that his son would not come back, but Florence convinced him to let Aaron go. "You cannot hold him here," she told August one night as they lay in bed discussing it. "He needs to find his own way just like you did. And if he chooses to come back after college, it will be because he truly wants to, not because he felt obligated." Aaron did come back, 3 years later, armed with new ideas and boundless enthusiasm for implementing them on the ranch. He and August worked side by side, the younger man's modern knowledge complementing the older man's hard-won experience. Together, they transformed the ranch into one of the most successful operations in California. Alice, meanwhile, decided she wanted to be a teacher. She attended normal school in Sacramento, and then returned to Colfax to teach at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town. Florence was secretly thrilled to have her daughter nearby, though she was careful not to show too much motherly interference. As Florence and August moved into their 50s, they began to slow down slightly, delegating more of the work to Aaron and their long-time ranch hands. Florence still took on sewing commissions, but she was more selective now, choosing only projects that truly interested her. August spent less time in the saddle and more time managing the business side of the ranch, though he still insisted on checking the cattle every morning. One afternoon in early spring, Florence was working in her garden when she saw August riding up from the pastures. He dismounted with a slight groan, a reminder that he was not as young as he used to be, and came to join her among the newly planted vegetables. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" August asked, sitting down on the bench Florence had placed at the edge of the garden. "If I had not torn that shirt, if you had not agreed to have dinner with me, if any one of 100 little things had gone differently." Florence set down her trowel and moved to sit beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I remember that we found each other when we both needed it most. That has to mean something." "It means everything," August said, wrapping his arm around her. "You know what I think about when I look back on my life, Florence? I think about that day I walked into your shop, desperate and broke, and with no idea what I was going to do if you could not fix my shirt. I was so focused on that meeting, on the land deal, on building a future. But the future I thought I was chasing was nothing compared to the one I found with you." Florence turned to look at him, taking in the silver threading through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes, the hands that were still strong but now spotted with age. He was as handsome to her now as he had been at 27, perhaps more so because now she knew every story behind every scar, every memory that shaped him into the man he had become. "You gave me a family," Florence said softly. "You gave me a home and children and a life I never dared to dream about. But more than that, August, you gave me yourself. Your honesty, your patience, your unwavering love. You stitched my broken heart together, and I will never stop being grateful for that." August cupped her face in his hands, his blue-green eyes intense as they had been all those years ago. "We stitched each other back together. That is what makes this work, what has always made it work. We were both a little broken when we met, both looking for something we could not even name. But we found it in each other." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and unwavering commitment. When they pulled apart, Florence rested her forehead against his and smiled. "Tell me something," she said. "Do you still have that shirt?" "The one I mended the day we met," August laughed. "Of course I do. It is folded up in the chest at the foot of our bed. I could never bring myself to throw it away. That shirt changed my life." "Mine too," Florence agreed. "We should frame it or something, pass it down to Aaron and Alice so they know where it all started." "That is a lovely idea." August stood and offered Florence his hand, pulling her to her feet. "Come on, let's go inside. I believe there is some of that apple pie left from dinner, and I have a sudden craving for something sweet." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, moving a little slower than they used to but still in step with each other. The sun was setting behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. From the barn came the sounds of Aaron directing the ranch hands as they finished up the day's work. From the open kitchen window came the scent of bread baking, Alice having stopped by after school to help with dinner preparations. This was home, Florence thought as they climbed the porch steps. This house, this land, this family they had built from nothing but love and determination and an unwavering belief in each other. She touched the silver heart pendant that hung around her neck, feeling the tiny stitches etched into the metal, a permanent reminder of how far they had come. August held the door open for her, and Florence stepped inside, enveloped immediately by the warmth and noise and wonderful chaos of their life together. She heard Alice call out a greeting from the kitchen, heard Aaron's boots on the back porch as he came in from the barn. This was her world, the one she had never dared to hope for, the one August had helped her build stitch by stitch, day by day, year by year. That evening, after dinner had been eaten and the dishes washed, and Alice had headed back to her own small house in town, Florence and August sat together on the front porch. Aaron had gone to check on a mare that was due to foal any day, leaving them alone in the comfortable silence that came from decades of partnership. "You remember what you said to me that first night we had dinner together?" Florence asked, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "About building a life, about finding someone to share it with." August was quiet for a moment, thinking back. "I said I needed roots, a place to call home, a family if I was lucky enough to find someone willing to share that life with me. You found all of that," Florence said. "We found all of that together." August reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. His hands were rough and scarred from years of hard work, but to Florence, they were the most beautiful hands in the world. They were the hands that had held her when she cried over Thomas's betrayal, that had learned to change diapers and soothe fussy babies, that had built this house and this life and this family. "I love you, Florence Keller," August said, his voice rough with emotion. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. That is how it has always been with us." Florence squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes even after all these years. "And I love you, August Keller. You stitched my broken heart together, and I have been whole ever since." They sat together as night fell completely, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn came the gentle nickering of horses. This was their kingdom, the life they had carved out of dust and dreams and determination. 5 years later, when August suffered a bad fall from a spooked horse and spent 3 weeks laid up in bed recovering, Florence rarely left his side. She brought her sewing into their bedroom and worked while he slept, and when he was awake, they talked about everything and nothing, just like they had during that first blizzard when Aaron was a baby. "You do not need to hover," August grumbled one afternoon, though his eyes were soft with affection. "I am not dying, Florence. I just bruised my ribs and twisted my ankle." "I know that," Florence said primly, not looking up from the quilt she was piecing together, "but I am going to hover anyway. You hovered over me for weeks when I was sick with that fever 2 winters ago, so turnabout is fair play." August laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. "Fair enough, though I seem to remember you complaining quite a bit about my hovering at the time." "I did not complain that much," Florence protested, but she was smiling. She set down her sewing and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "I was scared, August. When I saw you fall when you did not get up right away, I thought I might lose you. And I realized that even after 35 years, I am still not ready for that. I do not think I ever will be." August's expression softened. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, just as he had done that first night after their dinner together all those years ago. "You are not going to lose me, Florence. I am too stubborn to go anywhere. We still have years ahead of us, years to watch Aaron run this ranch, to meet our grandchildren when Alice finally settles down, to sit on that porch and grow old together." And he was right. August recovered fully from his fall, though he moved a bit more carefully after that, and finally admitted that maybe it was time to let Aaron take over most of the heavy ranch work. They settled into a comfortable semi-retirement, still involved in the ranch operations but with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. Alice married a kind schoolteacher from Sacramento when she was 29, and they had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl. Aaron married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they had 4 children of their own. The house Florence and August had built filled with grandchildren on holidays and weekends, and Florence discovered that being a grandmother was just as rewarding as being a mother, with the added benefit that she could hand the children back when they got too rowdy. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Aaron and Alice threw a party for their parents, inviting everyone from miles around. The house and yard were filled with friends and family, with ranch hands and their wives, with clients Florence had sewn for over the decades, and cattle buyers August had worked with throughout his career. It was a celebration of not just a marriage but of the life Florence and August had built together, the legacy they would leave behind. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Florence found August standing apart from the crowd, looking out over the land they had fought so hard to keep. She moved to his side, and he automatically put his arm around her, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about that torn shirt," August said with a smile. "About how a piece of barbed wire and my own clumsiness led me to the greatest gift of my life. About how lucky I am that you agreed to fix it, that you agreed to have dinner with me, that you chose to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy with impossible dreams." Florence laughed softly. "You were never broken down. You were just waiting for the right person to see your value." And I was not taking a chance on you, August. I was taking a chance on us, and it has been the best decision I ever made." They stood together as the last of the guests departed, as their children and grandchildren said their good nights and headed to their respective homes. Then they walked back into the house, the same house they had built 40 years ago, and climbed the stairs to their bedroom. That night, as they lay in bed, Florence traced the lines of August's face, memorizing features she knew as well as her own. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" August asked, covering her hand with his own. "For everything. For walking into my shop that day. For not giving up on me when I was afraid to let you in. For building this life with me. For stitching my broken heart together and keeping it whole all these years." August pulled her close, and Florence rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We stitched each other together," he murmured. "And we are going to stay that way, you and I, forever." And they did. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that come with a long life well lived. They celebrated the births of great-grandchildren and mourned the loss of old friends. They watched the ranch continue to prosper under Aaron's leadership, and saw Alice become one of the most respected teachers in the county. They grew older together, their hair turning silver, their steps growing slower, but their love never diminishing. On a warm summer evening in 1924, when Florence was 65 and August was 69, they sat together on their front porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson, painting the land they loved in shades of fire and honey. From the pastures came the gentle lowing of cattle. From the house behind them came the sound of their family gathering for Sunday dinner, children laughing and adults talking in the easy way of people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. "We did good," August said quietly, reaching for Florence's hand. "Did we not?" Florence squeezed his fingers, feeling the familiar calluses and scars, the strength that had never diminished even as they aged. "We did better than good. We built something beautiful, August. Something that will last long after we are gone." "Because we built it together," August said. "That was always the secret. Not my work or your work, but our work, our life, our love." Florence nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She touched the silver heart pendant that still hung around her neck after all these years, feeling the tiny stitches etched into the metal. It had become her talisman, her reminder of how a broken heart could be mended, how damaged things could be made whole, how love could heal wounds that had seemed beyond repair. "You stitched my broken heart together," she said, as she had said so many times over the years. "But this time," she added, "and I stitched yours. We sewed our lives together stitch by stitch, year by year, until we became one whole cloth. That is what marriage is, August. That is what we have been doing all along." August smiled, and in that smile, Florence could still see traces of the young cowboy who had walked into her shop 42 years ago with a torn shirt and a desperate hope. "That is the most beautiful thing you have ever said to me, and you have said a lot of beautiful things over the years." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Behind them, someone called that dinner was ready, but neither Florence nor August moved. They were content to sit just a little longer, holding hands, watching the land they loved slip into darkness, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. This was their legacy, Florence thought. Not just the ranch or the business or the house. Not just the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their names. But this partnership, this love that had endured for over 4 decades, that had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy. This was what they would leave behind, the example of 2 broken people who had found each other and made themselves whole. August lived another 5 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74 with Florence lying beside him, her hand in his. Florence mourned him deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had made the most of every day they had been given. She lived another 10 years after that, staying in the house they had built, surrounded by family, still taking on the occasional sewing project, still telling anyone who would listen about the cowboy who had walked into her shop with a torn shirt and stolen her heart. On the day Florence died at the age of 80, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed, her last words were a smile and a whisper. "I am coming, August. Wait for me." And perhaps he did. Perhaps somewhere beyond this world, two souls who had been stitched together so thoroughly in life found each other again in whatever came next. Perhaps they were still building something beautiful together, still choosing each other, still proving that broken hearts can heal and broken people can be made whole with the right kind of love. The ranch remained in the Keller family for generations, passed down from Aaron to his children to his grandchildren. And in the house that August built and Florence made into a home, hanging in a place of honor in the front hallway, was a simple shirt under glass. It had been mended with such skill that the repairs were nearly invisible, visible only if you knew where to look. Beneath the shirt was a small placard that read, "This is where it all began. August and Florence Keller, 1882–1924, a love story stitched together." And that, in the end, was the truest summary of their lives. Two broken people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had taken their separate damages and woven them together into something stronger than either could have been alone. They had built a life stitch by careful stitch, with patience and love and unwavering faith in each other. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, a reminder that the best kinds of love are not the ones that come easily or without scars. The best kinds of love are the ones that require work and patience, that take broken pieces and make them whole, that prove every single day that choosing each other was the right decision. August and Florence Keller had that kind of love. And in a dusty California town called Colfax, their story lived on, passed down through generations as a testament to what is possible when two people truly commit to stitching their lives together, no matter how damaged those lives might have been when they first met. That was their gift to the world. Not wealth or fame, but proof that love can heal, that broken hearts can be mended, that it is never too late to start over and build something beautiful with the right person by your side. And in the end, what greater legacy could anyone leave?